So welcome to District 4, To the Point for Information News. I'm your host, Alove. Having a little bit of camera difficulty, but we are going to go over the Diddy trial with some questions with my favorite groups of portals, and then we'll give it to the public a little bit following when we're done. So we're going to talk about the Diddy trial. We're going to do a week's in review. So we're going to go over like a few things that I wanted to cover. So you see a lot of people in what I call the hyper reporters, means they cover the trial, minute by minute every day. And you'll see these two opinions. Some will say, you know what? He's locked under the jail. This is pretty much over for him. And then you'll see people come in and say, what do you mean? Like, that's not necessarily true. And so I wanted to sort of cover, as I do, the legal parts of it, which is pretty much all I covered. So I'm covering this parts of it because I want to make clear, so you'll see me turn my head a little bit. You'll see me do some things because this is live and I can't like take it out or anything. So let's first cover the understanding of yes, a lot of questions that people ask me is, it's one person, RICO is like this huge thing, and it has to be, a group of people. Or you'll hear people say, like, I don't understand the whole RICO thing, and people are talking about mobs and all of these things. Like, what's going on with that situation? So I wanted to clarify, as if it would, as a whole, all of the questions that I've asked. So I'm going to clarify them collectively. So the first part of that, so the first RICO case was actually in California. And it was the Hells Angels, the Hells Angels in 1979, when RICO, this sort of RICO in quotation marks, was applied to this particular gang of people. Now, for those of you that don't know, Hells Angels were a motorcycle gang on the surface, but they did commit a lot of illegal crimes using this sort of, front of being like a motorcycle club. Not a gang, a motorcycle club. During their time, they committed a lot of crimes, and therefore the RICO Act was applied. But what a lot of people don't know is they were acquitted. They weren't convicted. And so a lot of people assume, because of the strict federal standards of RICO, 100% of the time, a lot of that is going to be a conviction, so they say. But if you look at the history and you look at some of the court cases, you'll find that you can still beat RICO. It's a lot harder to beat in certain cases, but you can still beat RICO. One of the great examples of this contradiction in how to use RICO, before I tell you that, it's heavily used, to beat RICO, I'll say it this way, really lies on the defense attorney. It relies on the defense's ability to separate their client from what they're being accused of as a whole. Because remember, RICO was applied to a lot of mobsters. So let's take the contradiction of how to win and lose a RICO trial using John Gotti, federal case, John Gotti being the head of the mob at the time. I think this was in 1980. I'm going to look down for a lot of dates. You know how I do. Yes, 1980. Wrong. He had two cases. He meaning John Gotti. But the point of John Gotti's cases is that the first one he was acquitted of, but the second one he was convicted. This is the same guy under the same umbrella of this mob family, this crime enterprise, so to speak. But he was still acquitted of one and convicted of the other. And it all depended on those crimes that were involved, what the defense attorney labeled them as, how the prosecution presented its case. That's why in these last videos you've seen me say, no prosecution, nope. Or you'll hear me say, like, what was the defense talking about? Or you'll like, this witness, and it sometimes is a contradiction, because a lot of people said that. I do. Not even intentionally to be contradictory. I'm going by the law. I only do the legal part, so I don't put my emotions in there. Yes, so just also comments go towards me. They have for a while now. Well, you'll often see me sort of speaking, and it'll look like I'm just talking to the air. But I really am keeping the comments towards me because we had problems with that before. Don't come in here with, a lot of drama. In other words, like, you're gonna have to pick another channel for that, and I'm okay with that if you don't watch mine. But also, I want you to speak freely. I want, when you come in, you have questions, to be able to feel comfortable asking them and not feel like, you have to be censored. I will censor you. So just ask it however way you feel like you ask it. And then I will cut it down if I need to cut it down, or censor it if I need to censor it. Okay? So don't worry about that. Back to RICO. So we're talking about, it's not a cut and dry in this case. Now applying it to the Diddy trial. Let's go. So we're going to talk about a conviction of RICO, and this is the Black Soul Street Gang of Illinois. They were convicted of these crimes, and they were the first to be convicted of RICO as a solo person under the umbrella of an enterprise was Frank Thierry. Now, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I just research. I don't ever hear the names. But I think that's, if you look it up, you'll see that that's the person that's technically accredited to be the first solo, in quotation marks, person of being accused of RICO, which applies to the Diddy trial because Sean Combs is sort of in that sort of boat where it's like a one-person / enterprise conspiracy theory where you don't have a sort of clear-cut mob-style clarity. And even with that, we learned from John Gotti that you can still get off. So you can still beat RICO. And he did. He meaning the defense attorneys in John Gotti's first trial. So I use that contrast because it's the same person, same enterprise, same, scenarios, pretty much under the same RICO Act. And one, he goes to jail, and the other one, he doesn't. So it is heavily relying on the defense's ability to separate their client, and sometimes multiple clients, because sometimes RICO, is multiple people, is applied to multiple people, out of that separation, out of that enterprise. And it involves a lot of things. And I'll tell you some of the winning strategies for that. They showed a lack of criminal enterprise, no pattern of RICO acting, right? Withdrawal from the enterprise, that's an obvious one, lack of continuity. And that's what I was saying in this case, as I apply it to a possible win for the defense in this case, is because there's not a lot of it. I'll speak a little bit more about that later. Yes, I will answer that question a little bit later. Let me just get through these. And then statute of limitations is always an obvious one for almost anything. And then, so for proving, a lack of personal intention to participate in enterprise criminal objectives. And you guys are already like, what the heck did she just say right now? I got it. I understand. So the reason why I say that also is because in this trial, now as these history or historic cases that are RICO cases apply to this trial, you have to apply them because the elements are still the same. They don't change, right? Those past cases that were won up against all odds, because it is almost a certainty that a RICO trial will be won. That is the general thought of thinking. If it gets to that level, the prosecution has enough to prove enterprise, to prove racketeering, and to be able to put that defense or that defendant inside that enterprise. Or not inside, a part of enterprise. But we have to also break down enterprise, because a good defense attorney can also blow that up. Enterprise, as if to say, in a sort of mobster type way. And I'm going to break it down like this. The front is legal. But the activities that are put through this sort of what looks on the surface to be legal applies as a sort of racketeering style, RICO style enterprise, okay? It's a front, in other words, okay? I.e., the mobsters back in the day used dry cleaners, okay? To filter and what we call clean money, right? To take something dirty you're doing as a criminal act and filter it through to make it, what we call clean. So they use dry cleaners. Now, the proof that Puffy and Puffy's enterprise or Puffy's businesses sort of masked these illegal acts or were used to filter the illegal act. I pay you money to actually be a drug dealer, but I'm paying you as an executive for Bad Boy Entertainment. Okay, I mean, I'm making stuff up as I go along, but I'm trying to explain to you how this works. So, but it doesn't clearly show that at this point. And some people are like, what do you mean? So let's break down some of the witnesses. Okay? So you can see as it applies, because remember, we're going to have as it applies to RICO, as it applies to these past cases, so you can sort of get a better idea of what's really happening here. So some of the, let's go with Capricorn. Let's start with the most recent. Okay. So Capricorn Clark. I wrote him down because I do apologize to Don Richard because I called her Hughes, and it was my sort of pseudo name for the psychologist because I didn't want to call her out and put her name out there. So I just kind of gave you sort of a pseudo name for her. But earlier because I used the word Don to sort of mask it, I said Dawn Hughes in the last video, and her name was not. Her name is Don Richard, and I actually caught it and had somebody correct me. Okay, so I'm correcting in this video. I apologize for getting people's names wrong. I don't mean to do that. I'm not in the courtroom, so I'm going by notes and information and transcripts. Okay, so Capricorn Clark. Some people are like, very riveting testimony. Definitely shows, we're getting into the enterprise part of it. But we have to remember that enterprise has to take these acts and bring them together. You can't just have separate acts of somebody acting up, for lack of a better description. So I say that because we have Puffy being a beater. We know this, okay? Puffy maybe wasn't the greatest guy in the world. Puffy might have made a lot of people scared. He also made a lot of threats. But were the threats pseudo applied to Capricorn as I bring it around? Capricorn said that basically she was victimized by Puffy. You know the testimony. You've heard it probably 1,000 times since she said it. I don't have to go over that part. But I will say that she is his former employee. And when it was all over, the defense goes in and says, and makes it plain, that the same woman that said he threatened her life, he beat people, he kidnapped her and took her to Scott and Scuddy's house and all of these things, turned around and asked for a job. And you're thinking, well, she could have easily felt like there was but you can't include all of that. You can include her testimony. She never said at any given time that she asked for her job back for a specific reason. So you have to think about that, because remember, in the jury box, you cannot be influenced by what we're saying outside here. You can't. You literally have to go by what was actually said in the courtroom. You can get transcripts and read back if you forgot something, or you have added your own opinion to it since the person said it, or you have a judgment of this particular witness, or whatever the case may be. You can reread testimony, they'll have it sent to you. But you cannot apply what's not in given testimony to. So if all you heard in there And then you hear one story by the prosecution, and then you go in and hear the defense say, but the same person asked for their job back. What's going to stick in your mind the most as a juror? Because as it applies to RICO, right? You have to put these acts together collectively. If she was threatened and she was afraid, why would you ask for your job back? I mean, it almost doesn't make sense because she was out. She was out, right? If you want to escape something, right, and you're out of it, what would be your reasoning for going back? Now remember, the prosecution has to prove their case. The defense does not necessarily have to do that. It is the prosecution's job. So if the prosecution set that up, where she was so afraid, because that's really the crux of her testimony, without detailing it. It's too many to detail right now, but without detailing it because you've already heard it, but just it's to say she was afraid. She was a part of this. She had nowhere to go. She was sort of trapped in here. And then you turn around and say, well, I'm going back to ask for my job. It's a job. She wasn't in a relationship like Cassie. Cassie's dated him. You're mixed in a case like that because you love them still, or you think you love them. Or you're being manipulated with, sexual activities, money, a place to stay, whatever. Possibly, because we don't really know, but possibly, right? Although she testified to that, I'm saying, I'm just saying it in retro. Then you just work for somebody? How many toxic jobs have we all left? How many did you return to? Okay, so I'm saying it in that sense, right? This is how you can say RICO and this act that is applied to Diddy at this time can be questioned based on what we're seeing. So I'm not going by anything else, and past cases. I'm looking at these past cases going, okay, how many of these were won? How many people were accused? How, I can give you some stats because I love to give you stats. Let's go with just since 2012, you can fact check me always, and to 2022, which is fairly recent, before COVID, 4,698 individuals, roughly, were investigated in a RICO case. 4,000. That's not a lot of people. I mean, it sounds like a lot, obviously, but in the legal system, when you think about how many people are accused of something or investigated for something, this number is relatively small. So you can't, the weight of what's happening right now, you cannot apply RICO to just anything. And prosecution knows that, right? It's also almost a certain in thought process win. That's why I said prosecution has to do a little better. Remember I said in the first video, I was like, oh, you used to support the prosecutors. I support the law and how it is applied inside that courtroom. And I will tell a prosecution team or a defense team, in my opinion, whether or not I think you're covering the elements enough. It's not personal. So for those of you that went all in, thank you for going in, because I love to, I love when you go in because you let me know what's going on. But I mean, you don't necessarily, I wasn't saying that they were terrible, individuals. I'm just saying, as it applies to this case, it made what we thought would be a shoe-in look like it's not going to be that. They're going to have to work for it, right, if it happens. But let's talk about Maya. It's obviously a pseudonym. We all know this by now. She was a victim and a former assistant of Combs. She testifies under this pseudonym. She testified basically more as a victim, right? It's more of trying to pull together these collective acts to put them under the enterprise. But it doesn't clearly show that this enterprise, once again, was sort of a filter for these illegal acts. It just doesn't. It's not at this stage. Now that we have time and all of these things. But at this stage, from what I've seen by now, and everybody's like, oh, they're killing him. It's a shoe-in. I said, not until you look at the elements. You have to sort of show that this is sort of a racketeering scenario. You have to show enterprise. You have to show RICO as it applies legally to the federal case. And it's not, it's pulling stuff to show what type of man he was, to show what went on with these freak-offs and so forth. But it's not pulling it in to say that this enterprise was set up that way. It sounds more like he was just for lack of a better description, just kind of like a jerk. And he was an abusive guy, and he was maybe not nice to everybody. And no one, and you can get him on abuse, but that's state. You can probably get him on maybe mental, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Right? We'll talk about that. You can probably get him on, some kind of coercion to a certain extent, but it has to be to this enterprise that's set up this way. And it doesn't show that it was set up for that. It shows that it got out of control after a while, with his fetishes and temperament. So far, okay. So she was more of that sort of testimony for the juror. She's more of this sort of throwing out there what type of guy he was. And then we have Israel Flores. He basically testifies on behalf of the video, right? He's letting you know more that Cassie was beaten. This goes back to the same testimony of her best friend at the time when Cassie, what's her name? Regina, sort of testifies that she saw Cassie. She took Cassie to the hospital, but Cassie refused treatment. That's more of he was an abuser. It's more of it goes back to the same testimony, and Israel sort of does the same thing. Okay, and then we have we had Dante. Well, not yet. So we have these witnesses sort of testifying throughout the day, sort of pulling it around to parts of RICO, parts of sort of it kind of could be racketeering-ish behavior, because we remember Scott Muscuddy, aka Kid Cudi, also testified sort of to this sort of, his car was blown up after Diddy mentioned it, and then he broke into his house. But he also testified of two things that could separate it. He testified that Cassie gave him meaning Diddy, his address. He also testified that, in a sense, Cassie played him to go back to Diddy, which puts her back in a situation, but she was dating him, she could kind of, and he also testified in a sense that they spoke about the incident. Him and Diddy. So why am I mentioning this? Because you see a pattern. You go back to the testimony of Cassie's mother. Cassie's mother's name is Regina. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I'm mixing it up. Cassie's mother's name is Regina. She testified about the $20,000 that Puffy later gave back. Cassie's best friend testified to Cassie going back to him. Let me see if I have Cassie's best friend. Her name is Carrie Morgan. So we have Carrie Morgan, who testifies Cassie refuses treatment, back to Diddy. We have Cassie's mother, Regina, testifying $20,000 could be extortion, but Puffy gave the money back after he wasn't mad anymore. So if you put this sort of cut together, you see a pattern of him losing his temper, getting mad, doing something, and then going back to repair. Is that necessarily an enterprise? As it applies to RICO. So you sort of see like, okay, he's got a temper. This is clear. He goes wild and ballistically violent when he has a temper. But he also sort of undoes it see what I'm saying? So you can see how if a defense attorney goes in there and sort of, because, and I say all this too, thank you for reminding me, that the prosecution will be wrapping up next week, pretty much. So then we have the defense coming in there to undo, to counter, as they tried to do. Some of them, they did it on cross already, but they're gonna have to present the case. So they're gonna present their case, and you're gonna start to see, as we have Dante Nash come in, you have an LAPD officer, possibly a Los Angeles Fire Department investigator come in and testify. We'll start to see different levels of what's happening. And we'll have to apply them as they apply to RICO. So this case, as it is starting to unfold, isn't as open as shut as maybe some of people out there would have hoped. You know what I mean? Because you're thinking, this guy, lock his butt up. I mean, he needs to be in jail. You know, and for some of the crimes that he did, he probably does. But we have to apply it to what they charged him with, and that's a RICO charge. So I don't know, because I haven't seen all. Somebody's asking me, do you think he'll win? I mean, I'm telling you that based on what's happening right now, you can't tell. You have to actually, as a juror, look at the defense's case first. So it would be premature to say whether or not, from the jury's point of view, you could probably gauge a little bit as an attorney, maybe gauge a little bit if you're doing an analysis, because you kind of understand the legal parts of it. But I don't ever give that type of opinion. But as a juror, you're not doing all that. You're just looking at what's happening right now and sort of going day by day on how this testimony applies to what you're supposed to be doing in the court. I did say that in the last video. People do forget. I said in the last video, people forget. You know, that the jurors aren't really legal people. You know, they're not following in the same way the judge is probably following, or, you know, the attorneys who are presenting the case are following, or definitely not the way the defendant. He's probably not following all emotion as he sees these people come up one by one and, you know, talk about stuff that he thought would always be private, right? And as they should, right? Because that you shouldn't really keep secrets like that. That's pretty crazy to work in that environment as well, I'm sure. But the idea, as we continue, is that they were forced to be there. So we don't want to forget what the prosecution is actually saying. They're saying, yeah, they were put in these situations and threatened with bodily harm, if not complete ruins, if they got out of it. And that's what they have sought to show. And witness after witness shows that, with the exception of the Punisher. What's Punisher's role? Somebody said the Punisher. I know, I just like saying that because it just cracks me up that his name was the Punisher. The Punisher's real name was like see if I can remember it. Sheree Hayes. That was the Punisher's name. AKA, for the purposes of this, we're gonna call him the Punisher. So, good question. Do I think, and this was brought up, that Puffy will testify? If you're asking my opinion, and I never say this, I always say, don't put the defendant on, don't put the defendant on the witness stand. He is foolish. Don't do it. These are usually murder cases, or you usually hear me talking about, some sort of outrageous defendant. Now, granted, there is the thought that Puffy will do the Nino Brown on stand. And legally, that's probably kind of risky. But man, I hope he takes the stand, because I would like to hear him explain some of this stuff. I really would. I mean, in just my opinion, I would love to see him get up there and explain all of this stuff that has been brought out about him that we did not know. I mean, people knew, but I mean, we didn't know either you didn't know the magnitude of it, you didn't speak about it, or you just saw him as the record producer. That's it. Puffy Combs. You didn't see Sean Combs. You saw, or Diddy as flip side. You just saw, oh, came up from the streets and he was a intern and that's the part of that made him, everybody love him. Outsiders, but people on the inside are like, oh, if you only knew. So I would like to hear him explain, and I would see that you could put him on the stand. You could. Because he's learned over the years to protect himself and how to censor what he says. Most defendants with these types of behaviors are so far out of control they can't do it. But you will also see that Puffy has a bit of an ego. So may allow him to bust out with a Nino Brown answer. Everybody loves Nino Brown. Nino Brown's a fictional character. You don't want to do that in live court, start going all in. But you could see how that would happen because he gets mad and his temper just kind of appears. I don't know him personally, but his temper appeared to sort of run away with him. I mentioned it was New York because you have a large variety. In my last video, I mentioned that these are New Yorkers. So first of all, New Yorkers have a lot of street. I mentioned that 2 of them were in Brooklyn. And I also, New Yorkers have a variety of people, types. So you might be a / Puffy on the low and still be on this jury, in this jury box, coming from, to answer this, when I said New York, and I paused and said city, it's like quote unquote city, like city slickers, they're city people. So that's how I was saying it in my last video. I wasn't saying they were in New York City. I believe they're in Manhattan, if I remember correctly. But I was saying New York, quote unquote city. These are city people. We're not in Oklahoma, or everything that they hear is like gonna floor them because they're completely shocked at this information. Some of them not only heard it but lived it. So they're not falling on the ground like many of us thinking. Some of them people are in there like, yeah, if somebody mess with me, I'm gonna blow up their car. Some of these people might be thinking like that, you know what I mean? Or, we don't actually know if he blew it up, but he's dating his girl, how it's that kind of street people. City people. City people are in the cities. You see a lot. There's a lot of crime in cities. Some people participate in it. It's not to say that you don't do that in Oklahoma, but the thought process about what you're seeing is going to be a little bit different, even if you don't live that lifestyle. That's what I'm saying. So Dawn Rashad, I think she got blown up. I really do. I think she got blown up. I think Cassie, she's getting close. She didn't get blown out of the water. Well, they kind of did because they took away that sort of theory of the Stockholm Syndrome thing. And I figure in there, them meaning the defense, is probably going to blow that up a little bit more. Because she was a star witness. So when you say star witness, that means your case is built around the things that this particular person was saying. Now, they have a couple of them, but she, you can't participate, if we're thinking RICO, right? You can't participate in an enterprise. And then when it doesn't benefit you, you blow it up, right? She did. Dawn Richard also had a settlement. She also had a court case that she dropped. It wasn't a settlement. Cassie got a settlement. I think she got $20 million or something. Don't quote me. Something similar to that. But I think, Dawn dropped hers. And also, Dawn's lawsuit, this Danity Kane woman, came out days before Puffy got arrested. She's also the same one described compensation as money. So if you're a juror and you put that stuff together, you can kind of be like, I'm not sure how much weight I'll put to that testimony. So I don't think she had as much weight. If she would have talked about the stuff that was in her, when you read what she wrote in her lawsuit, what am I thinking? In her documentation, she talks about being at a party with Diddy, everybody's cell phone and keys being taken, and her being locked in the car and not being able to leave. That should have came out. They should have talked about that kind of stuff, because that's going to apply and make her a better witness than they ended up. I mean, they talked about it, but then they didn't talk about it. They talked about the things that she was going through, but then they didn't. It was a watered down version of what happened to her, not by design, just because she was that kind of witness. And then she got blown up on cross. I mean, that part of it was powerful testimony, but it wasn't powerful testimony. So you see in this trial, all of these witnesses that have testified so far could have gone either way. Even though Scott Muscuddy had a very powerful extortion element to his, coercion elements to his, sort of enterprise type thinking to his, does it really link together with anything else? 2 or more acts, right? You have to do 2 more over like a decade, over a period of time. So what is the gap between all of these incidences? Their prosecution is trying to say, listen, this is more than 2 incidences. This is multiple incidences, and it's over a period of time, which is structure for RICO. Let's see what else we have here. You guys have any questions? Feel free to ask questions if you have. I mean, you're already asking them, but. So, yes, there was a moment, that they stated, someone stated, I think it was in, this is not my source, this is somebody asking a question. I think I read it in maybe the New Yorker or something like that, where Diddy did glare at Cassie as she was walking into the courtroom. And who knows what goes through his mind. It doesn't necessarily mean anything positive, maybe. It could have been looked at like he was mad. She was testifying against him. It could have been, you never know what's in somebody's mind, but it didn't look good that if that's the case, that he was glaring at her inside the courtroom when she was walking in. That's probably, it's not a good look for the defendant. So Kid Cudi's not scared. Well, no, I mean, no, he's not from Kid Cudi's not from Brooklyn, but he hangs out. He wasn't scared. I would say, I don't know how far in the streets I try to say he is, but I mean, he didn't seem like he was terrified. I mean, he might have been terrified, like mad, but he didn't. He showed up. You wouldn't call him like a weak or kind of. You wouldn't call him a beta male. You would say, yeah, he was not really concerned with what Puffy was going to do with him dating, his woman at the time. I don't say Cassie's a wild child. Somebody's remarking that I say Cassie's a wild child. She was. I'm not saying that on my own. I'm saying when you look at the things that she does, she's dating 2 men at a time. She has quite a little bit of a list of men that she's been with, which is fine. Michael B. Jordan, she's maybe just dating around at that age. She had an unusual sex life. It's certainly not the norm, and she participated in a lot of it. So I wasn't saying that to put her on Front Street like I was judging what she was doing. I mean, that's none of my business what you do, and I don't really judge people like that. I think you can do what you want to do. But I feel like when you put it in text, it makes the situation more confusing. Because she's hanging with people that you're like, if you weren't in that lifestyle, you would spend no time with at all. I mean, you literally would just like, I'm not effing with him like that. I'm not hanging with him like that. But he had 2 faces, so you would have just stayed on the clean side. You would have been like, oh no, I'm not trying to do a threesome, Puffy. I'm sorry about that. Nice, I'll go to your white party for an hour or 2, but I'm not going to the after thing. You might have censored it that way, but you are not going to be just rolling like that, unless you have some sort of understanding. No, I get the idea. So someone saying, well, the idea is she got sucked into this as a young person and she was groomed. Yes, that is true. You can be groomed and brainwashed even as an adult woman. But you also have to be of a mindset to be able to get to that level, to groom. There has to be something interesting in that scenario or something you're attracted to in that scenario to roll in it, is what I'm saying. You know, if someone comes to a nun and says, you want to do a threesome, the nun is going to probably pass out and think they're crazy as all get out. Like, don't you see I'm a nun? Like, did you really just ask me that question? That is just, you know, and they'll give you a whole bunch of scriptures. Because that's what they do, right? They're going to be like, oh my God, like, I was out of my habit and, you know, I was at the store and some man approached me, you know, or, you know, I was hanging with somebody that I, you know, thought was a nun, and then, you know, they will not respond the same. But if you kind of have a little interest in something, you might, you know, your little eyebrow will go up. It might pique your interest, right? If someone said, you want $1 million for free? You'll listen just to see if they're telling the truth or not. It means your interest is piqued, right? If somebody that's a billionaire, you want $1 million, I'll be like, what is it for? You know, I need some substance there. I need you to tell me why you're giving me this and why there's no catch to it and whether or not I actually need it, type of thing. So since her response was not that way, it meant that it piqued her interest in something. And now he might have took it too far. That's what it looks like. Proof of that, the Punisher basically said it. He basically said she called. You heard me say this in the last video. Cassie called him for her husband. Multiple times, because he wasn't flown out there. I mean, not flown out, he was in New York. He didn't come there just once. Let's see what else we have. What else do we have? So let's define racketeering a little bit for my people. So set of illegal activities aimed at commercial profit that may be disguised as legal deals. Now, racketeering has to be proven because it's in the structure of what RICO actually means. It is the first part of the racketeering, influence, corrupt organization. It's in there. So you would have to prove racketeering, thus proving enterprise. Or enterprise, thus racketeering, however you want to look at it. All right, I don't want to go too long on this. I just wanted to kind of get up to date, answer a couple of questions, dive into, how do I know who's coming up? What, have you been on the witness? Because that's what I do. It's my job to know these things. Let's see, anybody I've missed that anybody wants to talk about? David James? David James, I do have him. He basically was the former personal assistant. He testified basically that he set up and cleaned up after the freak-offs and that he was ordered to get puffy drugs, basically. And I corrected that because everybody was going all in on how it proved, you know, something. But it didn't really prove anything other than that Puffy was doing drugs. In order to be convicted on a federal level, you have to be selling them. Look at the first video if you didn't get a chance to see that. It does explain it. Second video. Oh, thank you. Somebody said you do good overview. I try, you know. I care about this kind of stuff. I do. I find it interesting. So, you know, I go in as much as I can. Was John Gotti from California? I don't know. I think he was charged in California, if I remember correctly, but I don't think he's from, I don't know if he's from there. Or was from there, he's passed now. Let's see what else we got. Okay, I think I will wrap it up because I feel like I covered everything I wanted to cover. I don't know if Cassie was a floozy. I mean, what? I mean, she was young, so she probably was trying to not date him meaning Puffy, on some occasions. We've all been there when you've had a relationship that you break up and get back together scenario. Because there's no need to judge her. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you're getting tired of hearing about it? The trial? Oh, the freak-offs. Yeah, they're kind of hitting them kind of, they were hitting them kind of hard. We kind of would like to move on. Not like we don't need the information, but let's stick to some more foundational stuff for RICO. I'm sure the jurors are probably tired of it too. I mean, they're probably not tired of it because it's part of the trial, but bring it around. Let's wrap it up. Let's pull this where it needs to go, so we can get a different type of scenario. But I think that's going to happen next week, and I think it's going to happen as the defense brings in their people. I did read that. I read somewhere that Cassie dated Michael B. Jordan. Why you got a crush on Michael B. Jordan? Who doesn't? Or what woman doesn't? She didn't. She's. I don't know if she dated Suge or spent time with Suge, but Puffy found out anyway. So I don't think she stayed with him. I don't think she stayed with any of them. A lot of interest in her dating life. I mean, I guess you put it on Front Street. I guess people are going to talk about it. So that is, speaking of RICO, someone's asking me, what is the percentage of that? When there's not really a percentage that I could find other than it is almost 100% certainty that once you get it to trial, meaning a RICO case to trial, that it will be won. But it contradicted itself because when I looked at the actual cases of RICO, that wasn't true. There was a mixture of both of those in there, and I used John Gotti's showing an example of even the same person under the same umbrella getting two different outcomes. And each of those cases, as I studied them, really relied heavily on the defense. Even though it's the prosecution's job to prove, because RICO is such a strong case to win, that it's more likely that case is going to be won, you have to sort of do the OJ and go in there and change the minds of those jurors about what they're actually hearing. In the sense that, you start knocking stuff down. You don't want to, Enterprise, did they prove Enterprise? How did you prove Enterprise? Well, my client might have a bad temper, but that doesn't make RICO apply here. You can do that kind of stuff. And that'll probably happen during closing and some of the witnesses. Yeah, but the defense, someone's asking, the defense can present a strong case, but don't forget, there's cross still. So don't act like the defense is just going to go in there and do a closing argument. No, they're going to go in there and present the evidence and people that they have. Well, prosecution has an opportunity, because they have to have one, to go in there and question their witnesses on a cross. And even what they're saying in their evidence. That's what a trial actually is. So it's no cut and dry for the defense either. But in this case, it appears that it's one of the exceptional cases where they could actually get the defendant off. He could actually get acquitted. Where if you looked at the R. Kelly trial, the way that was going, he was going to jail. He was going to get federally indicted. It was almost a certainty, just like 100% certainty if you apply RICO. That seemed like the way the case was going. You were like, there's just no way for the defense to back out of this. When the defense presented their case, you're like, yeah, you guys aren't changing our minds. You're not backing us down off of this one. This is RICO, and this is Enterprise. And so he got convicted. Not such the case here, so far. You can think of cases like I'll think of like the Apple River case, where the prosecution on the defense's case turned a lot of those witnesses and made their case stronger using the defense's case. or the defense's presentation. So you can win that way too, even though it might look like, dang, when you presented your case, dang, it's pretty much, now you have to, case closed, and you have to go and let the defense present their case. But if you're a good prosecutor, you use that time to undo some of the stuff that you do, or do the things that you didn't do when you were presenting your case. So, a lot of people are like, I hope Bobby takes the stand. Yeah, we kind of want some salaciousness. This isn't a salacious trial. We just want to see some salation. Is that a word? I made that up. We want to see something salacious happen. So it's that kind of titillating thought that if he takes the stand, we're going to hear some counters. But I thought, we would have like a moment where he just sort of kind of Nino Browned it. It might even be one moment, but I could just sort of see him do that in a moment, and just sort of while he's trying to defend himself. I don't know if it's true. He might get on there and just be confused. But I think he can take the stand if a defendant could take the stand. He was a person that could, only because he's learned how over the time working in entertainment, going on interviews, being with publicists, how to, present himself, and that he can handle cross-examination by the prosecution, who's probably gonna, rub their hands together if he takes the stand, because they're like, great, great, let us make you confront all the stuff that you've been doing. Will he? More than likely. They might, tease us with it a little bit, but I will be surprised if they put him on the stand. Not because he can't take the stand, but in a case like this, he really should. I think the defense should put him on the stand. And I never, you look back at my cases, you'll almost always hear me say, do not put the defendant on the stand. Just do not do it. It's better that he just try not to answer some of this stuff. But not in this case. In this case, where you sort of have a dividing line and you sort of have shades of gray, and him clarifying it, believe it or not, might make him look more like a villain, which would actually help him in a RICO case. Because then it just looks like a bunch of incidences that just happen that just really don't go together like that. Which they can do without putting him on the stand, absolutely. All right, you guys, I'm going too long. I feel like this is really long. So thank you so much. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for doing that. You guys are even going back and watching my old videos, which I'm happy about. This trial, whenever you apply RICO to something, because it's so rarely applied, you always think it's an open and shut. So I guess my closing would say this. Not so much. Look back at the John Gotti cases. He had two. Both under the same umbrella, but acquitted of one, convicted on the other. Look at the elements of that, because when you read those cases, you see some differences that actually apply in this case that made that result end up being one or the other. All right? Thank you so much. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Like I said, mwah. I'll see, don't go. I'll see you guys next time.